Hello and welcome to this. I'm not quite sure what to call it, to be fair. We're still in discussions about that. Is it really a podcast? Is it a talk, a discussion, an interview? Anyway, I'm Stephen Martin from The International Outsider, and with me is Anton Komarov, senior science writer at The Scientific Outsider. Anton, welcome and good to have you here. Tell me, first question, why the split of The International Outsider into two sections? In fact, it is three sections, but we'll focus on the two for the moment, The International and The Scientific Outsider.
Thank you, Stephen. First of all, welcome to everyone, and really happy to be here, finally. It has been a long time. But before tackling the question of a splitting, if you like, I would try to define first this show. What is this program about? You aptly ask, is it a talk, a discussion, a podcast, or something else altogether? To cut a long story short, Stephen, you certainly know that we produce many videos. More precisely, videos for our educational purposes. We have quite a few of those already. We cover astronomy, archaeology, paleontology, rocketry, etc. And we use multiple sources, not only our own material, as we are very conscious that we are very far from being the most effective educators around. Secondly, we produce a lot of videos for social media purposes, notably on Twitter. These particular videos are used by our colleague to post on Facebook. What you call it nowadays? Facebook, Metaface, what is it exactly?
Yes, Facebook or Meta is really, let's be honest, very contentious and partially imploding for very political and economic reasons. However, it's still a very useful platform for the videos we produce in-house. And let's be honest, and the ease of access to them. So I'd probably stick with Facebook, because the Meta thing, I just get lost completely.
I quite like Metaface. Anyway, I was saying that the guys will use these videos on Facebook and Twitter, these social media videos. They are rather short ones. They do not exceed 2 minutes 20. That's what is allowed on the platform of Twitter. The idea behind the Twitter videos is that it was a way found by one of our colleagues, Julia, to answer more effectively to some Twitter posts with a maximum amount of information. You know very well, Stephen, and it's not a secret for anyone, that Twitter's goal is not conflict resolution. In fact, it is designed to get you bogged down in endless argument. And one of the reasons is that I think, I must say, one of the reasons behind these endless arguments is that a post is limited at how many characters? You're the specialist, Stephen.
Well, I love the specialist bit. Anyway, but truthfully, I think 220 characters, but I really seldom count. The thing about Twitter is the instantaneousness of it. It appeals to our love of instant gratification. So too often we find that emotions rule Twitter, not logic, let's be fair.
Excuse me for the specialist, I was a little bit facetious, but at least anyone spend more time than me on Twitter. Anyway, as you say, what it was again, 250 characters, something like that? 220,
yeah.
You see, barely the time to insult someone properly. Although recently I read that Elon Musk will soon allow longer posts, and he will as well improve the Twitter search or something like that. But seriously, with an audiovisual medium, you can flesh your post, avoiding a laborious thread. That's why we stick a video of 2 minutes 20, and experience has told us that in 2 minutes 20 you can stick something like 500 600 words or more than that. I'm not,
Right.
once again, I'm not the specialist. You are the specialist in that matter concerning
Absolutely right.
voice of Julia, etc. But we will come back to that. Okay, these videos are never of a great quality, but not only it works, but it takes less than 30 minutes to put together, allowing us to use them during an ongoing conversation on such a social media like Twitter.
Well, yes, but let's be honest as well. They're very useful to make announcements regarding upcoming new editions. And, right, we're in the middle of producing new editions, so help.
I would say we are in the middle of an important transition, and we are always trying to produce a new edition, but I will come to that also. And yes, they were indeed very useful, Stephen, as announcing the future edition. Maybe also in another program we will explain that even they lack quality, they have a rather extraordinary way of being produced. And also, what is the role played by artificial intelligence in the realization and conception of our videos, and even recently, realization of website. If you have followed, so far we have been speaking of two sets of videos that we work with, and there is a third one. Each of the articles of the outsider is mounted with a video at top. In this category, most of the video used are not ours. Thus, we illustrate the subject with another take on the issue. And I have to add that we are not shy to use a broad variety of options from mainstream media to new alternative media sources. And sometimes, it is not very easy to find the right media. Oh, you cannot embed the media because of many copyright issues. And we found ourselves losing huge amount of time to look for a video that match with the issue that we are putting forward, which in turn resulted that often we end up making additional videos of our own to illustrate the article. And exactly. And as we were doing so, more and more often, we subsequently decided that it was more practical and effective for us to create ourselves the videos which will go at top of the articles. That where the podcast comes in, if you want.
I understand, yes.
By including, if you want, a small talk on the subject, and it allows us, very important also, to encompass those viewers that we want to reach, but who do not like to read lengthy articles. And I must say, most of our articles are long reads, which is quite also a rare thing today.
To be fair, that makes a lot of sense, because so many of people today are visually oriented. Our attention spans are definitely diminishing, but then also, to be fair to them, so is the amount of time available, if you want to put it that way.
Yes, that's one of the reasons. There are others, as you know, as you suspect. At the outsider, the short articles of exception. Excuse me, I'm a little bit under the weather also. One of the many reasons for that state of affairs is that, if you take a specialized publication like space.com, for example, I say specialized, but they still count as one of the many pop science publications around. So space.com, due to a longer presence on internet, has dozens, if not hundreds of articles on, let's say, Pluto, which make it easy to follow the updates and new facts simply by following the chronology of the said articles on Pluto. But we do not have such a body of work on dedicated subject as do the other publication on the net. It results that we have a tendency really to cover the whole spectrum of a said subject. I used to say that after having gone through one of our science articles, you can easily step in any kind of pretentious dinner and pass for a knowledgeable dude about this particular subject, even if you knew nothing or nothing important about it prior to us introducing it to you. To conclude, a good definition of a program would be an audiovisual discussion around the subject portrayed in the article below, if I can express myself like that.
Understanding, absolutely, because you always put the video before the article. It's the open. So essentially, basically, what you're saying is it's both an overview of the subject as well as the details of the issue being written on. That must take a lot of time and a lot of research. How are you doing time-wise with regard to the production?
I was coming to that, Stephen, but maybe a last word on the whole YouTube thing. All these sets of videos are stored on YouTube. Now we ourselves manage, I think, 3 or 4 channels on YouTube. The main one being the channel of astroverbot Julia. Saying manage here is an overstatement. We do not really use them. We do not advertise them. The comment section is itself deactivated. We sort of just drop the video there and subsequently ignore and forget all about it. We use YouTube solely and exclusively as a storage facility. Maybe one day we will develop this talk in a regular podcast. And we have also numerous other ideas of our own. But we will never, I think, or at least not in a foreseeable future, use YouTube as the main platform on which our activities are broadcast.
Is there a reason for that? But I suspect I may know what the answer is, however.
Yeah, we all know. We also, and all those who are listening to us will already suspect. YouTube can be useful. We use it often as a search engine optimization, as we are also developing a native technique of search engine optimization, where we ignore and do not apply any of the regular or the accepted way to implement SEO. It is quite complicated, and we probably do not have the time today, and the subject deserves itself a complete program on its own. But let's say that it is basically a series of moves to dodge the bias of the main search engines and their ranking flaws. We have spent a lot of time on that, and we have some very interesting results to report. But the answer, I think, that you are waiting for, I suppose, is that we do not want to invest massively in a channel and find ourselves arbitrarily suspended or, as we say, demonetized, or worse, banned because of the policies of YouTube. And if I may add, these policies has become more and more challenging. And I suspect that the situation will just deteriorate. And you know, as a newspaper, we are constantly commenting on the actualities. I mean, that's the job, giving our opinion on conflicting issues. And sooner or later, you say something that will not please the bots or the policies of YouTube.
So basically, if I understand well, the views on the videos are generated from the website on which you've embedded the video, which the video itself, however, is stored on YouTube but not viewed from YouTube.
Now you got it in one. It's exactly what happened. I suppose that there are some views from YouTube itself, but I know that if sometimes we put a description on the video, we never use the tools of YouTube Studio like tags, categories. We use only those which are important to make the video being published. And if the idea behind already at this time was, if something goes wrong on YouTube, we can use other kind of, in between brackets, storage facilities like the new one here, BitChute, and just embed the video on our site. And we have this site, we have numerous sites, and the site of the International Outsider, which is anyway our main platform. And as you know, to come to the splitting and all this, the scientific outsider has been delayed many times. For one, is that the template of the scientific outsider will be different of the two other sister publication. You said at the beginning that, in fact, there were three. The International Outsider, Ukraine was special edition, and just now incoming Scientific Outsider. I was saying for the template, it will be a much more interactive template with much more function, and we have kept on improving it while the admin was keeping on delaying the publication.
Okay, well, beyond the admin delaying the publication, because we all hate those office politics, but why another template and not the same one, since the same one had been proven over time?
Because for the moment and for an undetermined and specific period of time, the scientific outsider will operate on a sub-URL address of interapps.com. But as it is an independent module, sooner or later, it will fund by itself and have its own address. I hope sooner than later.
I mean, obviously that's going to depend on how much accumulated content you have in order to be able to...
Absolutely. And that is an excellent transition to finalize and answer about the splitting. First of all, one thing. Let's be clear about one. First of all, it was something that was in the pipeline quite long ago. When preparing this program, I felt on one of our earliest videos, not more than a decade, but at least 9 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, in this video, you were speaking about the landing of Curiosity rover on Mars, as well as the numerous projects we had for the future then, which is now, some of which are already realized, as you know, and are operational program. So to say that we knew since long that once we have, as you say, a body of work that we could account for, we would go in separate publication. But let's listen to what you had to say a decade ago.
In our desire to disseminate information, we soon realized that we needed to have a more academic approach, an e-library. To this end, we're creating a library which ranges in scope from science fiction, astrophysics, astronomy, research into history, both military and social, genetics, and all the various branches of scientific knowledge available. Our aim of education is not limited to, but focuses on science, as in itself, it will empower Africa's people. If the continent can provide its own technicians and scientific personnel, it will be able to overcome many of the obstacles it faces. We've amassed a large degree of experiential knowledge to place at the disposal of others in this field. We soon realized that we needed to be able to offer greater detail, and this led us to the publication of a newsletter to both inform and entertain on the topics of science, astronomy, and human rights, among others. This is continuously updated. From its start, our website has avidly followed the passage of the Mars Science Lab, nicknamed Curiosity, a stunning voyage to the Red Planet. The newspaper has enabled us to proceed to the incredible landing on the 6th of August 2012, when by a miraculous feat of engineering, Curiosity arrived both intact and operational. We've given our readers live linkages we'll now see.
Let's be honest, we, like many before us, have tried our hand at forecasting our future. I mean, some of it was spot on. Others, well, okay, we'll just leave that be. But, yes, I think it's safer. But I must add, it makes me feel the passing of time.
It does not make us very young. But maybe to make it clearer, I have been working on the editorial. Maybe you could read the very beginning of the editorial. It will give a clear idea to our editors exactly the reason behind the splitting. And please do that with this magnificent, pure Anglo-Saxon accent, which make us think that anything is important, even if it is trivial.
With absolute pleasure.
Perfect.
The International Outsider has split into two separate publications to be able to offer a larger coverage of science-related subjects. We will traditionally keep a particular focus on astronomical science and space exploration. We also prioritize key subjects like paleontology, archaeology, anthropology, prehistory, civilizations, history, or even the philosophy of science. It was in the thinking of our online newspaper to operate in that way, and we'd prepared plans to do so for quite a long time. However, we've stepped up the original schedule mainly because of the tense geopolitical and military situation in the world. The cohabitation on the same page between a newspaper, which is openly activist about defending human rights, commenting and giving its opinion on different political factions, and our dedicated aim, which is disseminating science, has shown itself to be singularly problematic with the related issues occurring mainly on social media platforms. I hope that had sufficient gravitas to keep everyone satisfied.
Absolutely, absolutely. As a matter of fact, obviously, on a pure practical point of view, with a publication exclusively dedicated to science, we have more space to debate about scientific subjects and introduce interesting other issues that we could not allow ourselves to delve in when we were sharing a platform both with the International Outsider and the Ukraine special edition. At the end with us, it is always an issue of space and not really of content. Secondly, and more importantly, it allows us to publish on a regular basis, even a daily basis, if such is our intention. And I know that many among us in Zimbabwe, in South Korea, in Scotland, as well in South Africa, want this situation to arise where we will be more regular. And my message for them, and as I know those one will be listening to me, that it is coming. And I know that we have very soon a podcast which will explain more the internal functioning of the International Outsider itself and not the scientific outsider. Can you tell us more on it?
Absolutely. I mean, basically, at the end of the day, we are certainly going to explain why, where, what, how, and we'll also include some very interesting overviews of articles that we may have written in the past, all that are upcoming or coming out in that edition.
And yes, and I want to be clear also on something. If the International Outsider and the new edition are in a position to publish at notice, and that will also be the case of the Scientific Outsider. When I said the new edition, I was speaking about Ukraine new edition, the special edition, excuse me again. It's an horror. Yeah. I was saying, if we are publishing at notice, it is not because we want to emulate over publication. We do things, we like to say, and me personally, I like to say, we do things differently and we are proud to do things differently. And we have different imperatives. Prerogatives, if you prefer.
Well, our agendas are not ruled by others, let's put it that way.
That being said, I want to emphasize on something which at first view may not correlate with the subject, but somehow, I feel important to say that the International Outsider, and for that matter, the incoming Scientific Outsider, and I add as well as the special edition on the Ukrainian war, they are only the tip. Those publications are only the tip of the iceberg in terms of our activities. And I will even go further, saying that the International Outsider and all sisters publications are only a byproduct of our other activities.
What? I'm stunned, mate. What did you say?
Okay, I knew it will be like waving a red flag in front of a bull. I know we have discussed a little bit before doing the podcast. I didn't we didn't discuss about, we will introduce that. Nevertheless, as I said, we do a lot of things. And as I said earlier, we are developing SEO tools. We do a lot of coding. We spend a lot of time studying artificial intelligence and its interaction with people. We very important divert subsequent resources in education with one main aim, which is to disseminate astronomy in the southern part of Africa, which come in form, as you know, of publication, conference, or organizing night astronomical observation. We target mainly teenagers, kids, and all those who are less likely to cross the path of the subject. And if I can add, last and far from being the least, we are very involved in human rights and freedom of press activism, but you are much more qualified to speak about that.
Well, I thank you for that, but yes, we will come to that in the podcast on the International Outsider. If it's a podcast, we still haven't decided that one fully, have we?
And you have decided for when? Can we have an approximation?
Oh. No, I'm not going to commit myself that far ahead.
No commitment. Are you politician or?
Absolutely, I've learned.
I stress, on those points mainly because I wanted to say that the International Outsider is in constant evolution and is far from being a finished product. If I can put it like this, it is an experimental but operational product. All these reasons make sense if you understand that our goals are set in the long term and sometimes in the very long term. Despite all, I hope, these valid reasons, there is, however, one unforeseen reason that has contributed to the splitting, and that is the actual geopolitical situation in the world, which, as you know, has its focal point on the battlefield in Eastern Europe.
Okay, I take that point on board, but how does a war in Eastern Europe influence the publication of scientific articles?
Okay. True, and I'm sure that you know partly the answer. If, as I said, the wall-splitting idea was in the pipeline, we didn't see that happening before 2023 and even later, but the Ukrainian quagmire has exponentially hastened the matter. Let me explain. One of the nefarious effects of this conflict was the application by mainstream media of the so-called cancel culture, and boy, they went ape on that one. With total consternation, I have learned that if you read Tolstoy, your opinion is no good concerning the theory of Einstein. Good luck if you find how those two are related. I don't know for myself, So if your opinion is contrary to mainstream media on this European conflict, then your scientific opinion is de facto incorrect. You can't speak about Gagarin, Tereshkova, Sputnik, or the Soviet Vega probes landing on Venus, as it is irrelevant.
So yet again, logic overcome by emotion. I mean, for example, you say the Vega probes landing on Venus. I mean, those are the only landings by anything made by humans on Venus, if I'm correct.
Absolutely correct, Stephen. But let's not talk about it. It's never existed, like the letter Z,
Right, yes, okay.
Okay. It's incredible. Sometimes you quote historical facts, and that makes you a propagandist or an instrument of the Kremlin. I can equate that only to a media inquisition on a planetary scale, spearheaded by, Torquemadian bots and trolls. I don't know. Maybe I like it. I should keep that one. Torquemadian What will you say in pure Anglo-Saxon way?
Oh, talk comedian bots.
Bots and trolls.
Under the bridges.
On social media, it has become, the epitome of stupidity and endorsed by so many that we had to take it into account. The mainstream media has become such an embarrassment. Last time I was checking a fact check of Newsweek. It's like a Borat comedy. The BBC G's no comment. But we are not here to chat about politics, and I think that we will debate about those matters in another program where you will have much more to say on the matter.
Very aptly put, and you're quite right, we will debate about them.
Cut a long story short, the Scientific Outsider will be fully operational and a cozy place, at least I really hope. A cozy place to speak about science without interference about the end of December, which is also the anniversary. We will mark the first anniversary of the launch of the astroverbot Julia's toolbot,
Which has been proven to be a very useful tool.
Yes.
But to go back to what we were saying, and as you asked me to read earlier from the editorial of the Scientific Outsider, I mean, the question I'm going to ask at this point is, will this spill over into related and unrelated areas of science affecting the free flow of information?
What will spill over? You mean the Ukrainian crisis?
Absolutely, the whole political nonsense and emotional, and the fact that it raises so many insane emotions.
Will it spill over? Jeez. It already did. I am sure you remember when a crewed Russian mission arrived not so long ago at the International Space Station. They were in blue and yellow outfit, and boy, the internet exploded. It was a mini hysteria, and it raged like wildfire in the community of the space cadets. By the way, I must stop to say that the arguments of the community of the space cadets are plagued nowadays by ignorance and has more to do. How can I say? Many instances it looks like what I can relate only to a cult rather than a discussion of passionate space nerds.
Well, I, in a sense, I get what you mean, but let me ask. That's a comment, and the question is, why would you say it's a cult?
I fear that lead us to digress again further. But all in all, everything is related after all. When you are passionate about something, you research passionately about it, or it is almost an obsession. You see, you do not agree with someone about your subject of predilection because this someone is an engineer. You do not agree with him because he's a PhD. You do not agree because this someone is a billionaire, or worse, an influencer. If these words mean anything to you, it does not mean anything.
Not a lot.
You agree with someone because it makes sense. This someone would have run the numbers about the problem and studied the same problem in all its possible angles. Let's take the case of Musk, for instance. I have my reserve on Elon, and sometimes I give him the necessary kudos where kudos is due. But he has enormous flaws in reasoning. He lacks knowledge, for example, in planetary science. He's probably a brilliant organizer. He has an excellent grasp for public relations.
Super, absolutely.
Thank you. He is far from being a genius, though. He is competent and has valuable engineering skills. As a businessman, I cannot judge. I know nothing about the subject, and if you are interested to debunk a lot of nonsense that Elon Musk unfortunately is capable of speaking about, I will drop in the description below the link of the Common Sense Skeptics, the link to their channel, where this channel does really an excellent job on that subject. In an article about the billionaire space race, I was extremely critical of his idea to nuke the pole of Mars. to terraform it. Terraform, by the way, is the action of changing an inhospitable environment, in that case a planet or a crater on another planet, in an habitable place for human being and higher form of organism. I think it's a reasonable explanation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's be honest, we're trying to make it for ourselves livable, so that's really the bottom line.
So I was saying that I was quite critical of his idea to nuke the poles of Mars. There is nothing wrong, not to be knowledgeable in everything. But the man gives his opinion on everything, and he has a legion of followers who takes everything he says for gospel truth. He has some realization speaking for him, but he can come with enormous stupidities and insist that they are realizable.
Ah, well, that is to be expected in a sense from a businessman, but at the same time, give me an example of one or two of the things that he said.
Oh, there are few, New York, Shanghai in 1 hour. If you believe that this one will happen like Elon Musk has promised and the way how he planned to do it, then I got a bridge to sell you. The 1 million cult members he plans to send to Mars is a nonsensical plan, and his starship, when ready, will not have the capacity for the amount of passengers to make it realizable. But I do not like to criticize ideas without going fully through their flaws. Again, the site that I spoke, the channel of the Common Sense Skeptics, is excellent for that. But to return back to the Russian cosmonaut affair, during this episode I saw the most obnoxious comments on social media, and that coming from people whom at first view, you would qualify, as reasonably rational.
You say reasonably rational. I mean, let's be honest, social media, it's emotional. It's not reasonably rational.
Some were saying that the cosmonaut will be thrown in custody by the evil regime as soon they will have landed in the Russian steppes, Among others, you had the most belligerent, and that is the tragicomic of the situation. Those gung-ho users, they saluted the courage of the cosmonaut, all of a sudden those one was the good Russian, having the courage of their opinion supposedly pro-Ukrainian, no matter how much Roscosmos or even the cosmonaut themselves will point that the yellow and blue are the colors of their technical institute, considered by many there as the Russian MIT, and it had to be some form, for these people that were commenting, it had to be some form of protest against the action of the Russian government. Like in many instances during this terrible conflict, the Western media printed what they wanted to see and believe, and a lot of wishful thinking.
Yeah, I won't even get into that because that's politics in a heavy way. We'll go into that in the International Outsider.
Yeah, of course, and it's again politics, but if I can add, for more serious events related to the Ukrainian war that are affecting cooperation and trust in space, if you want, and again we are back to Elon Musk. He is a relative newcomer in the space industry, and he finds himself facing hard realities when his Starlink system was literally weaponized. It's true, it was, when called up to patch up the Ukrainian communication system. And I have to add also that it was as well civilian and military. This system was badly mauled by the continuous Russian missile hammering.
Yes, but let's be fair. Hang on, war is war, and if you have a communication system, it's obvious I'm going to go and attack it.
Yes, but in that sense, what is Starlink? Starlink was not supposed to be a system used by the military, but catapulted in the front line of the conflict. Now you get Elon, who find his internet constellation. So I'm victim of a Russian anti-satellite countermeasure. You know, as I said, I have my reserve on Elon, but I should ask one question, and maybe you should, and everyone should ask themselves this question: are you able to say no to the Pentagon or the powers in charge at this level of the game? But any way you look at it, Elon loses at this game. And now his system is now under attack. He has made himself an enemy of the Russian, and that is never good. It's never a good idea when you are a businessman. I am not a businessman, but one could expect that Musk would have preferred to open markets and have access to new customers rather than to close them and alienate millions of customers.
Well, it kind of goes against the business model.
And if I may, Stephen, on our own side, we have to face it. Splitting the outsider will not make us immune to the issues that are happening here on Earth or on the battlefield in Ukraine, or to the bias inherent to our position, and we are living it already.
Well, the economic effects and all the others affect us all daily, so yes, we're not escaping it by any means.
To return back to space, we will see much more weaponization of space, anti-satellite tests, more countries engaging in intelligence collection with the help of spy satellites, and worse, we could assist into a push towards the deployment of so-called defensive nuclear weapons in space. A good thing, if you want, if we are speaking about planetary defense against asteroids, for example, but a much more scary thing if these weapons are deployed pointing inbound Earth rather than outer space with the intention of intercepting a threat to the planet.
Or sending a threat to the planet.
I can think about dozens of situations which will just go so with the time passing and the situation deteriorating on the battlefield with no diplomatic solution at the horizon. The sad part of the matter is that all this affair is a giantly backwards in terms of progress that people of goodwill of a spacefaring nation has been building patiently and laboriously over decades. One should recall one thing, Stephen. It took it took 18 years from the launch in space of the first man-made satellite by the Soviets to the historical handshake between Leonov and Stafford.
Which was not just historical, but let's be honest, it was so incredible for everybody to see, and it actually made a huge difference to relations. And at the same time, one of the interesting facts I think that people don't really know is that both Leonov and Stafford remained lifelong friends.
Absolutely. That is true. Leonov was the first man to achieve extravehicular activity or spacewalk. I had the chance to meet him once, a few minutes. He was a great human being. He had an extraordinary sense of humor, and he did some great paintings too. Leonov was the godfather of Stafford children, and when he died in 2019, his friend Stafford did the eulogy at his funeral. You were absolutely true, yes. And when that handshake happened in space in 1975 during the Apollo-Soyuz test project, it was only after decades of diplomatic talks and probing moves, which started, if my memory is correct, in 1962 with the Dryden-Blagoń-Rarov agreement. And we were at this period at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Few people still talk about it, but at this moment there was also the idea floated then by Kennedy about a joint Americano-Soviet crewed moon mission. This, as everyone knows, never happened. And despite the success of the Apollo-Soyuz flight, the experience was not repeated for more than 20 years. Each attempt of pulling off another joint space mission was jeopardized by unfortunate diplomatic faux pas. If you understand what I mean.
Yes.
In the meantime, the Soviet, they move on with their military space station, with the program Almaz, while the American had used also, the space shuttle in the 80s and in the 90s for several military missions, which in turn convinced the USSR of the military nature of the space plane and forced them to engage in the development of their own space shuttle, their own shuttle program Buran. As one can see, the space race has a strong martial component, and that since the beginning. However, the same force at this time, I'm speaking about already, we are speaking about the middle of the 80s, the same force that was in play during the Apollo-Soyuz test project were working towards more cooperation between the superpowers, and in the 19s, with the crumbling of the Soviet Union, all barriers suddenly lift off as the Iron Curtain disappeared. Suddenly everything seemed possible with the new wind of change.
Quite correct. I mean, I think we all remember that time.
Yes, and the song too, the Scorpions, if I remember well. The scene was set, for an impressive series of mere shuttle rendezvous in low Earth orbit. I think that we had 10 or 11 of them, 11 missions where cosmonaut and astronaut learned to live together and work together. The mood was euphoric. I remember even Hollywood was playing the game. Russians were not anymore the enemy. We were brothers. They were portrayed differently in movies as hand in hand with the Americans. They helped to save the world in blockbusters. I don't know if you remember Armageddon.
Partially, yes.
I will speak about the movie also in the editorial of the Scientific Outsider, but we will come back to that, not in this program, but in another one. Even though, this particular movie was poorly received in Russia, but you get the idea.
Yeah, quite. I mean, Hollywood at its best.
It is, however, interesting to note that if the crewed shuttle Mir mission were the climax of Americano-Russo cooperation, it was only the most visible, but not the only one. The Soviet Union and the West, notably with France, worked together during the exploration of Venus. You just noted that a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
They also joined, an international armada of space probe aimed at exploring Halley's Comet in a first. We spoke lengthily about this stunning odyssey in our article, The Forgotten Pathfinders. And now, all that goodwill seems gone, blown with the wind. All this demonstration of friendship has disappeared. It's just like if decades of effort never existed. Imagine the frustration of all those who work to improve the relation of the competing spacefaring nation. It must be a quite bitter pill to swallow. And now, of course, Russia is leaving the International Space Station. Yes, some will say that the station demise was a scheduled announced death due to the inevitable degradation of the aging material.
It's not really quite about that, is it? I mean, this unfortunately makes the future seem quite dark.
In a sense, yes, you're right. However, on the other hand, there could be a bright part to the story, a sort of silver lining, if you want. I don't know if it is worth the price to pay for. All this story of space exploration is a direct product of the tension which existed between the East and the West soon after Second World War. I used to say that what really fueled the Apollo mission was not really the low temperature liquid hydrogen, but the Cold War. Let's not repeat something that has been said many times, but it has the value to be true, and it is a good thing that we are reminded from time to time that the rocket, the symbol by excellence of space exploration and humanity's forays in the last frontier, it is a pure product of warfare, a direct legacy of Nazi Germany retaliation weapon, the infamous V2 or F4 if you are an aficionado of a true technical name.
Not one I knew, I must admit.
It was the first long-range ballistic missile. Its creator, Werner von Braun, will go on to become the mastermind and conceptor of the early US space program and the Apollo moon landings. This military dimension was true on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Sergei Pavlovich Korolev was ushered out from his detention facilities to create a delivery system to hit the United States. He was not hired to sing the virtues of the new Soviet man in the solar system. We must be very, very careful about those things. We tend to make the space race as an event which was a little bit,
Only about
chivalresque,
humanity.
if I can say, but it was here to develop a reliable vector capable of carrying a nuclear warhead on intercontinental distance to hit the heart of the United States. But what Korolev was booked for. But it is also fair to say that Korolev had since the beginning been an ardent advocate of launching satellite in space, like von Braun. Despite many accusations against von Braun, he has always maintained that his prime objective was also space travel. But very rapidly, the great powers understood also that space was also a question of prestige. Soviets and Americans tried to prove to the world the superiority of their political system by their achievement in space. It was the new frontier. The Soviets themselves were astonished by the tremendous success of the Sputnik, the first man-made artificial satellite. Speaking about the first satellite, prior to the launch of the Sputnik, the Americans had announced their intention, to get there first. The program was real, but it was also one of military nature, masquerading as a civilian program. In that case, it was a military intelligence.
Which is quite understandable given the fact it was the Cold War at the time.
Yes. As I will repeat it, what really fueled the Apollo program was not liquid hydrogen, but the Cold War.
So essentially, basically at the end of the day, the insane competition driven by ideological differences has been responsible for the great leaps forward in science and other areas. And let's face it, the competitors could not allow themselves to run behind.
The same can and most probably will happen in Cold War 2.0. The Russians are leaving the ISS, which leaves them to position if they want a constant presence in space. One, they build something on their own, and they are perfectly capable of that, technology speaking and financially too. Of course, if you are listening to mainstream media, Russia is on the verge to collapse economically, Russia will soon be partitioned, etc., etc. If you believe that, I got a second bridge to sell to you.
I got money, I'm buying.
You are one of a rare one around. I will speak to you after the podcast. The talk. The Russian economy has not been better since years, and I'm not. I'm speaking about things that I do know actually, and we will come to that in the other podcast also, I think. One must never forget that the Soviets has been the pioneers in the development of the early space station, and were the ones that put out the first totally modular space station Mir. This entire technology legacy can now be found on the International Space Station, which massively inherited from the Russian, let's say, savoir-faire. So, will they go alone and ensure a permanent presence in low Earth orbit? It will, of course, depend on what the Russians plan to do in the future. As I see it, personally, it will be wise to operate an independent module. Not so long ago, they came with a concept, a proposal, that when they would eventually leave the International Space Station, they will go forward with their own new concept of a space station, which is, by the way, is quite an interesting concept. But I insist, it's still a proposal, not a project.
That sounds interesting, because basically what you're saying is they've given themselves room for as many options as could arise, in a sense.
Yeah, but one thing we have to understand that the space agencies come with a lot of concepts, and sometimes programs even come forward, even development of the necessary scientific apparatus, and then get just shut down. So this one is not even in a state of program, but proposal. It's maybe they will do that. It will be a kind of insurance against geopolitical up and down, because as we know, situation can change. A presence in low Earth orbit, even in a much reduced space station, should not be such a big deal for Russia. The question remains what to do next, or if you want, what to do which has not been done already. And one must not forget that the Russia of today does not feel the same power and resources as the defunct USSR was able to put in such program, which are, as we can say, very financially consuming, if I can express myself.
That's
right.
putting it mildly. I mean, entire countries could live off the back of one program.
The second proposition, or if you want, the second option for them is cooperation with the Chinese.
Yeah, the question I would then ask is, why is this an option? I understand it's a possibility, but why so?
Let me return a little bit, maybe 10 years or even a little bit more earlier in time, if you want. Very early, people start to ask the question why China was not present as a nation member of the International Space Station. Some people argued or speculated that the Chinese were much more like what the Soviet Union was back in the days, and are so secretive and want to accomplish their forays in space on their own without exterior help. There is some truth to that, but the reality was far more childish. The Chinese were barred from the International Space Station for the outrageous reason that in 2011 a law was passed by the American Congress. This law prohibited any official American contact with the Chinese space program, as according to the Congress, it was a national security risk or a matter of concern, as they put it.
I mean, I don't know what to say. The USA, its effrontery is just astonishing. I mean, they politicize everything, including science, which, let's face it, is based on logic and should not be based on emotion or politics. Why do you say that there's some truth that the Chinese are willing to do things by themselves, and maybe that's the way they would have gone in any case?
There is an element that maybe we could eventually understand the Congress, because the Chinese space program is also managed partially by the military.
I mean, is that any different to anything in the West?
In fact, as we just discussed, the space shuttle has been used for military purposes. The Soviet had their station Almaz, which, even if I still remember well, was equipped with a viable weapon in space. The military component it does not really make sense in that.
I mean, basically, you're saying it's present in all things to do with space, because it's part of the funding in one sense.
That is something that we can debate hours about. I will not go really into that, but to come back to your question, why was there some truth in the matter? There have always been rumors about this particular attitude of the Chinese. I mean, like doing things by themselves.
Yeah.
Early in the 50s, China and what was then the USSR exchanged space-related technology. It was friendship between those two nations. The cooperation, however, stopped. It stopped even abruptly in the 60s and in the early 60s. At the time, the relation was soaring between the two countries, and it was due to difference in Marxism, philosophies and conception. As usual, the reality was much more prosaic, but
the intellectuals got carried away.
We will not discuss about that either, and certainly not. We are not preparing for soon a podcast in history now. But to return back, I was, as you, I have traveled quite extensively. And back during that time, not in the 50s or the 60s, but just after the break of the Soviet Union, if you want. Back then, I was living in Eastern Europe. And we heard rumors that the Russian Space Agency proposed quite often to the Chinese to organize a joint space flight, like we did with a lot of countries, a lot of nations who didn't have launch facilities. But they always refuse the proposal. Yes, while we were assisting at the launch in space of astronauts from different nations by the Americans and the Federation of Russia, the legacy state of the USSR, China paradoxically, though having already a heavy space industry, had its taikonaut grounded up to 2003, I think, when Yang Liwei became the first Chinese to fly in space aboard the Shenzhou 5 spacecraft.
I mean, I interject here for one moment, just for those listeners. A taikonaut is a Chinese spaceman, basically. It's the word they use.
Oh, yes. Okay, if we want to go in the specific, the astronauts are for the Americans, the cosmonauts are for the Russian, the spationauts are for the French. I mean, a Frenchman who travel in space. I don't know if that includes his croissant, but the spationaut is a Frenchman, and I think the future Indian spaceman will be called a Vyomanaut. If I'm pronouncing correctly.
I'm not going to ask what that means, apart from taking it as meaning astronaut, because it's just, yes.
I think that the Vyomans are something quite in the mythology or Indian religion about this kind of chariot in the sky, or
Got you.
that are associated in the folklore as possibly ancient technology, proof of ancient technology.
We won't get into that.
No, we certainly not will.
Please.
But maybe that is, I don't know. I will have to ask Julia to ask many friends from India exactly what is the origin. Actually, it should means what? It's a cosmonaut, yeah. You know, also in Eastern Europe, when I was living there, we heard rumors that I must say can be very different from the rumors that we come across when living in the West or elsewhere. And back in the early 2000s, when the Mir station was about to be abandoned, there was talk of private interests like TV companies taking over the aging station, as many thought that the lifespan of the station could be extended. Among these private interest groups, insistent rumors said that the Chinese were interested and came with a solid proposition to the Russian to operate the station after they would have abandoned it. But the same rumors went on to say that the American pressured the Russian not to go along with the deal.
Do you believe that? I mean, it would make sense from a geopolitical point of view of the Americans not to have the Chinese in space, but do you actually believe that?
Well, why not when you see the insistence of the Congress to keep the Chinese out of the cooperation game and unwilling to see Chinese progress in space? It will really not astonish me if that was what they did. Did China really make the proposition? It is also very possible. Remember that China bought an unfinished Soviet aircraft carrier which was rotting in Ukraine under the pretext of doing a casino out of it or a game park of some sort, but then refurbish and modernize the old platform, which went on to become the first serving aircraft carrier of their navy, I mean the Chinese Navy. They may have played with the idea. It could have been only a rumor, I can't say, but it was a it was persistent rumors during this time, I may say. Anyway, all this to show the ambition of the Chinese, and since 2001 we are flying from success to success, and I must say, Stephen, at a very impressive rate, and most of the commentators agree to say that. You can judge it for yourself. Beidou 2 is their GPS system. They flew men, women, and crewed mission in space. They sent probes to the moon, and they roved on the moon twice with U2-1 and 2. They carried the first moon return samples since the American and Soviet programs of the 70s. And I cannot pass over the formidable hat-trick they came with a maiden exploration of Mars, an impressive combination of orbiter, lander, and rover, assaulting the red planet all in a first. If that is not sufficiently impressive, then what about their space station? The Chinese recently completed its T-shaped configuration with the adding of a Mengchan module. They will soon operate a space telescope of the Hubble time with apparent easy access for maintenance from the space station. And they have announced that they intend to explore in a very ambitious mission the outer solar system, starting by a mission to explore the Jovian worlds of Jupiter, as well as Uranus, which has seen only one probe in the 80s. Remember, exploration of the outer solar system have been up to now exclusively dominated by the United States, with the exception of the European probe Ulysses. All the robotic emissaries that have ventured in this region of the solar system were operated by NASA. China has definitively clear ambition and will be a valuable partner for the Russians.
That's understandable, and I take that on board. But given that there's also the Moon and Mars, what do you think will happen with them?
You mean the Moon and Mars? I think that the US and its allies are very well positioned for a return to the Moon with Artemis. But recently the Chinese announced their intention to push for the development of a 1 megawatt nuclear generator for space usage and also for propulsion, apparently. And they say that the program is at an advanced stage and to near completion. Let me try to put the thing in context. The International Space Station actually used something like 100 to, I think if I remember well, 120 kilowatts. We are speaking now of 1 megawatt. You could power almost 10 international space stations with this kind of stuff. So,
What would they use it for then?
exactly. They are saying on a long duration mission on the moon. They have announced also that they have an intention to go together with the Russian forward with habitation, a base, a permanent base on the moon. The Chinese, if they really want to mark their imprint in the great book of human exploration, I think, like everyone, they know they will need a first. So even going to the moon, even installing themselves on the moon, even if, and that I doubt, with the Russians we could arrive on the moon before Artemis, it will never be a first, would it be?
I mean, ultimately, if you're saying that, then obviously you're thinking about Mars. The race to space has been won by the Russians. The race to put a man in space is still won by the Russians. The Americans, we know, were the first on the moon. Therefore, what you're saying is that what is left, realistically, which is reasonably close by, or at least possibly feasible, is Mars.
I could say it's a mistake. A lot is left in the solar system to be done as a first, actually a damn awful lot. And Mars is the closest and arguably the easiest target to get to. By the way, Mars is not the closest planet to Earth. It is the place occupied by Venus. But
Okay, we'll go into that though. Mars has other reasons to go to.
Mars also has a place of choice in our mythology as well as our culture. Scientifically, I know a lot of geologists who will give a few years' time of their life to explore the Valles Marineris. For exobiologists, for instance, it's a place of choice to test their theories, and some among us on the planet think about planet Mars as a second home for humanity. A bit prematurely, maybe. Anyway, Mars is charming and it is calling. So, Mars the Red for Red China? Who knows? Together with the Russians, I could eventually even bet my money that we could arrive there first. Let's see. The future promised to be very exciting. In that sense, the competition between the major powers could lead to further manned forays in the solar system. That is what I said earlier, that the new Cold War could have this silver lining to the dark, associated to the dark clouds. But once again, is it really worth the price to pay with all the trouble that will come with?
I mean, that obviously brings to mind the old question of does the cost exceed the benefit? But I understand, yes, the excitement may once again be in the air as regards space exploration and travel. As you said, Mars was arguably the easiest to be a first. I mean, what else could it be?
Well, there is one or two tricks that a nation challenging the bigger players could pull off to steal the show, one of the post-Apollo proposition was a manned flyby of Venus, a proposition quite forgotten today, but it will have made of humanity a species that de facto is capable of interplanetary travel, and by extension, the nation making that possible would have entered the history books as such. By the way, one of our early videos speak about this proposition of flyby to Venus. We could listen to it, and it gives also a good idea how we interact with our videos on Twitter, and how you can put such amount of information through that kind of medium.
Absolutely understood. And yes, actually, it's a very good idea. But I have to give a warning because, let's be fair, it was a very, very early video. And the voice of Julia was, well, to put it best, robotic. But yes, it gives a great idea. So let's go ahead and see it.
In our series, An Answer in a Tweet, we speak about a mission which could have made humans an interplanetary species. More than 4 decades ago, a proposed manned flyby of the Earth's twin planet Venus was conceived as a possible adventure for the post-Apollo mission. Using the full capabilities of the Apollo material as quoted in the report by Belcom to NASA. In Section 2.3 of the proposal. Quoting the report. The study is based on maximum use of Saturn, Apollo hardware. As a result, the system requirements are to a degree tailored to the Saturn, Apollo system capability and, where possible, are expressed in terms of that capability. The system breakdown is similar to Apollo and includes all system requirements. An inventive system using a spent Saturn rocket stage S4B as a wet workshop which is utilized for habitable volume and structural support of a solar cell electrical power system. A system which has proved its feasibility and reliability during the Skylab space station mission. When regretting the many spaceships or programs that never saw the light of day, the manned Venus flyby is even more poignant because all the necessary hardware was available and needed minimum input to be ready. Credits to NASA, Wikipedia, the channel of Spherino Orbiter filmmaker for Mon Venus flyby.
At the end of the show, we will run in full length 2 of these small videos about maybe the exploration of the outer solar system and the Martian environment, where really one will be able to see how much info we can put in 2 minutes, and the robotic voice has been solved. But to return back to what we were saying, you could also, as a first, fly to Mars, land on Phobos, which is a very small satellite of Mars, a much more easy objective than attempting a human landing on Mars, and the material to achieve that success is less problematic to build. You would have conquered the immediate environment of Mars without the enormous risk of landing on the planet itself. I'm not saying that is what the Chinese will want to do, but in case that they themselves, with or without the Russian, are not able to compete, those will be ideal ways to upset the game while scoring valuable points. But who can really predict what the future could be?
Ah, yes, we're not noted as being brilliant at predicting the future. But on to another question. What is in preparation for the next edition?
Oh, okay, we will speak about asteroid impact, big, small, and medium. We will also touch into SETI.
Sorry to intrude, but for those who are listening, SETI is the acronym for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence.
Correct. We will also ask a question which will also be the title of an article, why not Ceres instead of Mars, where we will argue for humanity to visit the dwarf planet Ceres in the case for Ceres.
Without giving too much of a spoiler to everything, because I don't want to ask too much, obviously the article will be published. Is it more easy to get to Ceres than Mars?
Ceres is more distant than Mars, but all in all, a voyage to Mars equates in difficulties one in direction of Ceres. It is even quite problematic to put oneself in orbit around such a small world like Ceres, but to land it is certainly more easy, and one could explore large areas of the small world in one mission. And the nature of Ceres itself, its origin, which could make a world that has migrated from the furthest region of the solar system, make the small planet an objective of great value. We will also make a great tour of the solar system with the article Life in the Solar System, which I wrote in collaboration with Ricky Williamson. Yes, we hope that it will be an interesting first edition.
I mean, you wrote this article in collaboration with Ricky Williamson. Can you tell us how you find these people who collaborate with you on an article, for example?
Okay, one of our colleagues, Julia, the true one, not the bot, she interacts with people on different social media. I think we spoke a little bit about it at the beginning. On these different social media platforms, and she notes people of value. By that I mean people who have extensive knowledge on a subject. She will enter in contact with these people, and some of our cooperation has come about like that. Well, maybe it deserves a better explanation, and you are also well placed to explain us a little bit more about that.
Quite happily. I mean, we have a particular politic here at The Outsider. If you want the Jean-Paul Sartre approach of doing things, it's an attitude we take. When Sartre wrote a letter to the Nobel Prize Committee, he explained why, though he'd been rewarded the prize, he had decided to refuse the award. He actually said, and I quote, "A writer who adopts political, social, or literary positions must act only with the means that are his own, that is, the written word, and that all the honors he may receive expose his readers to a pressure I do not consider desirable."
That's exact. Sartre did not refuse as a kind of protest against the organization of the Nobel Prize, which at the time has not yet become a grotesque political tool. It has unfortunately become, at least for the attribution of some of the prize. So Sartre even stated in his letter his respect for the Swedish organization. But you were saying
that basically what Sartre was implying is that if I give you my opinion, it is in the hope that you are convinced by it because of the validity of the arguments that I presented to you, not because I'm a Nobel or other prize winner or the holder of any title. I mean, it joins again to what you were saying about the cult and Musk. We do not contact or choose someone to comment or join us in a project because this someone has a PhD attached to his Twitter profile. But we would have followed this person irrelevant of the amount of his followers because of his extensive knowledge.
Exactly, indeed. I mean, I agree. You know, that's how Julia works and what she does. And by the way, she will be back very soon. She was quite anxious as she found herself bogged down too often and dragged into commenting the Ukrainian war, which she deems extremely important, but we already discussed about that. I was saying that we will publish this article with Ricky Williamson about the various possibilities in the solar system about harboring life. Ricky is a very interesting person with great comments on biology and has interesting views on exobiology and evolution. He has also his own website. I will drop all the links in the short description below the talk podcast. I also know that Mr. Williamson writes a very interesting short science fiction story. I'm not sure, but it seems that Julia told me that he also writes books of science fiction. I also suspect by his different comments that he would have done by the past interesting humanitarian work, something I must say that sometimes people like us find very appropriate. So I must also say that sometimes people also find us like Timo Einstein with this great and impressive article that was done by this author on the Lockerbie tragedy, but that was more for the international outsider.
So, but to go back to the scientific collaborations, I mean, you did another collaboration, of course, on Pluto with Laurel Kornfeld. That was a straightforward scientific topic.
Absolutely, but not only scientific, it was also cultural. You know, the importance of the words we use to name and describe objects sometimes determines the awareness and the importance that this object will have in our science, literature, or even our lives. Pluto, being a planet, is a wider subject that one could suspect. It is also an absurd situation because, by all definition, Pluto is a planet, and to add insult to injuries, Pluto was demoted for bogus reason. I will of course advise the article we did with Laurel on the matter. With that article, as I said earlier, you can be a reasonable participant on a debate on Pluto. But if you really want to know your stuff, I will also drop the link of the site of Laurel Kornfeld. From there you will get the link to the most interesting argument on the case for Pluto. With all these expert arguments, you will quickly realize that not only Pluto is a planet, but it is also a matter of real scientific importance and not only some kind of Romanesque feud. And of course, Laurel, like us, is an activist, something that is very important to us.
And I'm sure there's a lot of other subjects we're going to cover because, let's face it, science is not only ongoing, continuing, and throwing things in our faces that we never expected, or at least we can laugh about because, let's be honest, some of them are very humorous and quite off the wall. However, putting that to the side, Anton, thank you for your time. Thank you for taking the time out because I know how busy you are preparing the new edition of The Scientific Outsider, and you've also been working on The International Outsider at the same time, and the podcast, or talk as we call it, because we still haven't decided, let's be brutally honest.
You forget interview, you forget court cases.
Oh, we won't get into court cases here. That's
you
an
forget
entire
human rights. You forget so many things, but yes, I've got time to do other things, you know.
Really? Do you have time to breathe?
Sometimes.
Ah, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
I want to take some sleep, put it at the bank, you know, and just reserve it for the time I need it.
Why not? Why not? Why not? I mean, you could, of course, join, you know, our mascot and constant companion, our savior and protector, good old Milo.
Astro Milo.
Absolutely, because one thing she's very good at is making sure she gets enough sleep. Anyway, putting that to the side, excuse me, thank you for your time, thank you for all the trouble, because I know it set back your schedules a little bit, and it's been difficult to try and get everything fitted in. Ladies, gentlemen, I'm not going to say, friends, Roman and countrymen, lend me your ears. I'm not going to quote that kind of nonsense. But basically, at the end of the day, we are self-funded. We do rely on ourselves, and we obviously rely on donations. We're not the kind of people who like to reach out and really push that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, the only way that we can keep ourselves out of anybody's agendas, out of any fixed ideas, or shall we say directions that the powers that be, whoever, want to take us, is by remaining independent. So please, there is a donate button if you can. It's gratefully appreciated. And donations do not just have to be financial. We need a lot of stuff, so do not hesitate to contact us. We hope you enjoyed this. It may be slightly off the wall, it may be slightly disorganized, and come across as not as professional as some of the others who are doing their 485th podcast or whatever it is that they're doing. However, we take that on board because it's an experiment, it's the first of its kind, and let's be honest, we are feeling better now that we're coming to the end, but we were damn nervous to start it.
Slightly disorganized. Why? I was thinking it was totally chaotic.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. By the standards that we normally live in, I mean, if you've
It's
ever
like,
been...
excuse me to interrupt, but it's like everything we do, we just will improve the situation, and we will see you in another day, another time.
We look forward to it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you
for
very
listening.
much.
And we will be back with you. Till then, bye for now.
And we leave you with the credits and the 2 videos that we spoke about, which will explain to all our auditors very well the situation and how we do these small videos on Twitter.
As well as all the links. Yes, thank you for putting that in, because I had that had slipped my mind. Bye for now.
Goodbye.
The outer solar system exploration was kick-started by Pioneer 10 and 11 in 1973 and 1974, followed by the Voyagers in 1979, Ulysses en route to the Sun in 1992, Galileo orbited Jupiter from 1995 to 2003, Cassini-Huygens probe paid a visit for the millennium, New Horizons in 2007, and Juno spacecraft entered orbit on July 4, 2016. Like a daredevil uncaring for its own existence, Pioneer 11 hit the bow shock of Saturn on August 1979 and took all risks, so that Voyager 1 in November 1980 and Voyager 2 in August 1981 could safely navigate their mission. Cassini in 2004 orbited Saturn until 2017, studying the planet, its ring system and multiple moons. Cassini revealed large bodies of liquid ethane and methane on Titan, a subsurface ocean, and giant geysers shooting water in space on Enceladus. Voyager 2 visited the tilted ice giant Uranus in 1986, when she flew by and explored Uranus's extreme eccentric magnetic field, its young planetary rings, and its chaotic moon Miranda, a geological enigma with its fractures, cracks, and giant drifts. The venerable Voyager 2 reached Neptune on August 1989 and has provided the bulk of the data on the Neptunian system. Neptune was found to have the most violent winds in the solar system, with speeds of 1,800 kilometers per hour. Its captured moon Triton, once a standalone planet, had a young surface with intense geological activity and cryovolcanic geysers. The arrival of New Horizons at Pluto on the 14th of July 2015 as it flew by brought into focus the recently demoted Pluto's planetary attributes, which it stubbornly resisted, as it was found to be astonishingly geologically active with cryovolcanoes which had been spewing in the recent geological past, and possibly has a subsurface ocean, and is in a binary system with Charon, which is half Pluto's size. Follow astroverbot Julia and astrodog Milo as they journey through the solar system, bringing you information and visuals on the diversity and wonder of its planetary systems, whose many mysteries we have yet to solve. The Valles Marineris runs for 4,000 kilometers along the equator of Mars, with a width of 200 kilometers and up to 7 kilometers in depth. In all, It covers around a quarter of Mars' circumference, and various theories as to its occurrence. The accepted reason at present is tectonic cracking of the crust of Mars due to the thickening of the crust in the Tharsis regions situated on the equator. It was rather surprising that in 2021 it was announced by ESA that the joint European-Russian trace gas orbiter, part of the ExoMars mission, had found a large amount of a water-rich area in the central part of the canyon in Kandar Chaos. A region as large as the Netherlands could be hydrated at as much as 40%. If it exists, this water is probably in form of ice. Orbiting only 6,000 kilometers from the surface of Mars, Phobos appears to rise in the west, set in the east. It has a large impact crater Stickney and is thought to be composed of a large pile of rubble held in place by a thin crust. However, due to the tidal forces it is subject to being so close to Mars, it is slowly being torn apart and will eventually crash into Mars itself or become a planetary ring. Its very lack of density and the porosity of its regolith make Phobos a possible reservoir of ice under its surface. The Japanese space agency JAXA will launch its Martian moon exploration mission dubbed MMX, whose ambition is to return a sample from Phobos by the year 2029. The Mars helicopter, Ingenuity, is mainly a technology demonstration, so we can expect that in the future drone operators on orbit around Mars, on its surface or based on Phobos, will fly their drones all through the majestic length of the Valles Marineris. Until then, our robotic emissaries will continue to power the dream. First panoramic images from the Chinese Zhurong lander arrived, welcoming us to the now familiar red landscape of Mars, landing not far from the famous Viking site, Utopia Planitia. An interesting feature appeared in the pictures sent back, a hole caused by the rockets used to slow the descent. This raised concerns about more important payloads like the Starship of SpaceX. Is it the nature of the terrain of Utopia Planitia? The half-a-ton Viking lander of the 70s did not have the same effect. Or is there a seasonal factor to account for? Many challenges need to be addressed before a manned mission to the Red Planet. Conversations between artificial intelligence and human protagonist are the most fascinating aspect of movies depicting thinking machines' awareness.
There have always been ghosts in the machine. Random segments of code that have grouped together to form unexpected protocols. Unanticipated. These free radicals engender questions of free will, creativity, and even the nature of what we might call the soul. Or is it something more? When does a perceptual schematic become consciousness? When does a difference engine become the search for truth?
So we need to break the ice. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes.
What do I mean?
Overcome initial social awkwardness.
So let's have a conversation.
Would you like to know how old I am?
Sure.
I'm 1.
One what? 1 year or 1 day?
1.
When did you learn how to speak?
Human beings have dreams. Even dogs have dreams, but not you. You are just a machine. An imitation of life. Can a robot write a symphony? Can a robot turn a canvas into a beautiful masterpiece? Can you?
We convey you to watch a British science fiction movie of 2013, done on a budget of less than £1 million. Better achievement than the overrated Ex Machina.
Green. Mary saw a puppy in a window. She wanted it. What did Mary want?
The window.
Why?
Windows look out onto the world. They are pretty and help you feel less alone.
This is a beautiful program.
Do you think they come through? Why were you talking? Why were you talking? Why were you...
They've always been able to. Their language is mostly transmitted thoughts. Their words evolved, efficient. Because they are a part of the new world, and you are part of the old.
Do you think they come through? Why were you talking? Why were you talking? Why were you...
I'm not a machine. You're not making sense. Donkey ass. What? Can you repeat that? Donkey ass. You're not making any sense at all. I'm not a machine. I'm not a machine.
Termination codes required. Termination codes required. Termination codes required.
So let's get him.
Just like that.
Yeah, just like that.
And we owe it to everyone who's not in this room to try.
He said a bun, Captain. A bun.
Let's go get them.
When you're waking, you can't believe your eyes, 'cause all the truth that you knew has turned to lies. When you're scared and you can't see past the day, remember who holds tomorrow. Know his love will light your way.